Meet Rude, an E-rank adventurer stuck with the unimpressive skill of Debuff Immunity. Mocked as a miasma scavenger, Rude is determined to prove his worth. When his comrades betray him in a new dungeon, he's left on the brink of death. Desperate, he committed a taboo act of eating monster meat. Just like what I said just now, this is the story about a lone adventurer who had to break a taboo for the sake of survival. He tore through the tough raw meat, not bothered by the bloody and metallic taste assaulting his tongue. Rude bit and bit into that minotaur's flesh until his hunger was satiated. By the time he was done with the beast, a rancid pool of blood had already coated the floor. His mangled arms, the massive slash wound on his back, and all other injuries from the incident healed in an instant. Then came the notifications that he had acquired the roar and battle axe skills. Rude could feel the exponential growth in his potential and strength. Unbeknownst to him, the floor of the dungeon he was trapped in was a lair of multiple deadly beasts. A diary of a certain nobleman once said that devouring monsters should be listed as a taboo. What does it mean for a human to eat a monster? It means taking in their evil essence into one's body. According to the text, the first symptom that appears upon absorbing the evil essence of a monster is a feeling of euphoria that cannot be expressed by mere words. It's a trance-like state, accompanied by body strengthening. Then, the second symptom strikes: severe headaches, nausea, and intoxication. The third symptom is supposed to be sudden death, a 100% fatality rate for those who have foolishly tried. And yet here we are, watching a crazed man formulate his revenge plan, while mowing down rows upon rows of monsters. The nobleman also listed instances of humans turning into monsters themselves after taking in the evil essence in their bodies. If you look at how relentless and beastly Rude was, you could say that he had turned into a monster in his own way. Some monsters he didn't even bother killing. He just took a bite out of their raw flesh alive. This method of never stopping his run gave him skills such as appraisal, echolocation, and absorption. After venturing deeper into the dungeon, he met a gigantic snake that looked like it might pose a threat. Rude was too busy eating a wolf and gaining an agility boost alongside the lightning cloak, though. Feeling disrespected, the snake lunged in. Rude barely avoided being eaten whole by prying the snake's mouth open with his battle axe. Without losing focus, a crackle of thunder looped around his body. What came after was the descent of his lightning cloak, shocking the giant snake to the core. After defeating such a formidable foe, Rude continued his onslaught, killing and eating a massive spider with the help of the poison mist he got from the snake. Snacking on the poor spider, he was able to obtain thread manipulation. With the help of thread manipulation, he could now easily restrain several monsters effectively. At one point, he was basically moving like a zombie, fueled by the desperate desire to get back home alive. Just when he thought the exit was upon him, the dungeon presented even more challenges along the way. It was like there was no end to these persistent bastards, no matter how many he ate. Even at the sight of a monster army, his will to get back home alive persevered. Let's roll back to a few days ago in the peaceful frontier city of Bologna. It's a territory home to multiple labyrinths. One of them was called the Miasma Labyrinth. Why, you ask? The air inside was poison, continually chipping away at the HP of brave adventurers. For that reason, most adventurers hated the place, but it was Rude's favorite spot. He was in there every day to the point of being dubbed as the miasma scavenger. It's not the best nickname out there, but it was pretty accurate at that time. Reaching the 6th floor of the dungeon, Rude smiled at the healthy growth of miasma grass in a secret plot of land. These things can purify the miasma that the dungeon gives off. It's also an irreplaceable source of income for our MC. Rude only took just enough to sell for his needs. A bag full of this grass could probably last him for around 3 days, so it wasn't too bad for a quick harvest. Unfortunately for Rude, trouble was waiting on the corner upon exiting his harvest spot. Miasma rats have gathered to possibly mount an attack. Fitting for their habitat, many monsters in this place use miasma and poison as weapons. That's also part of the reason why adventurers hate it here. It's too troublesome. But using poison against Rude was a whole different ballgame. He would just pass through the poison clouds unscathed and deal some damage with his blade. The surprise factor, combined with his sudden attack, usually got him free kills like this one. The problem comes after the first blood has been drawn. There are more rats to repel. Pissed off that their comrade had fallen, the remaining monsters would naturally retaliate. With a rushed attack, Rude could take advantage of the timing to land a slash of his own. This brought the number of rats hassling him to just 1. The only thing separating his face from the rat's nasty fangs was his cheap arm guard. Much to his surprise, another person chanted a fireball spell from a distance. The spell was fast and destructive, eviscerating the rat effortlessly. Rude could have been caught by the blast had he not rolled away in the nick of time. He looked at the destruction caused by a single spell, fear welling up inside his chest. The mage spoke up, annoyed that he missed his real target. He belonged to a party of 3 good-for-nothing adventurers. Rude recognized these guys. He had seen their faces plenty of times in the Adventurers Guild. Short Mage walked up and politely offered to help Rude up. He claimed to see how Rude struggled against the rat, so he just wanted to help out. Refusing the help, Rude asserted that a little heads up before blaring a spell inches away from his face would have been appreciated. Annoyed, the Short Mage insisted that he shouted fireball loud enough to serve as a warning. The fatty from the party decided to roam around the area and found Rude's hidden stash of miasma grass colony. With greedy looks on their faces, the party felt like they'd just hit the jackpot. On the contrary, Rude looked troubled. The only way that these people could have found the stash was by following him to his harvest spot. Short Mage looked very offended by such a serious accusation. He claimed that they were just adventurers earning their living, and they just happened to meet and save Rude while they were at it. The 3 threatened to use some force if they couldn't even hear a proper word of gratitude from the infamous miasma scavenger. Realizing the position he was in, Rude closed his eyes and swallowed his pride. He lowered his head and apologized for doubting their intentions. He also thanked them for the save. Rude was being civil, but the powerless anger was bubbling within. By night, Rude had reached Bolumina. In there, he went straight to his base camp, the Full Belly restaurant. Even outside the labyrinth, violence still followed the poor guy. Some drunkards wanted to throw him out of the restaurant for bringing his miasma smell that made the food taste horrible. They were pushing Rude around to prove a point that an adventurer was someone with the ability to defeat monsters, someone who could make the impossible possible. So if someone like Rude with a trash skill like abnormal status nullification doesn't get any respect from arrogant bastards, all he could do is grit his teeth and take the insults. His unique ability, this rare abnormal status nullification skill, didn't give him the best combat power. Sure, it's helpful in exploring the miasma labyrinth as he's not affected by the ambient damage. But it's still useless when it comes to actual combat, something vital for adventurers. Without any combat or team utility skills, Rude was not welcomed by any parties. He also garnered that nickname, Miasma Scavenger, since he was always in the lower levels of the labyrinth, scampering for items. In other words, his failure of skill made him an outcast in most adventurer circles. He's a grown man, yet he still has to fight a life or death battle against a mere rat, a low-level trash mob. His nights were filled with doubt and anxiety about living his life as the miasma scavenger forever. Buddy, maybe it's time to change your career. No matter how crappy he felt the night before, he has a job to do in the Adventurers Guild to put food on the table. Since the bastard party yesterday took all his stash grass, Rude would have to find a new colony while he still had some money left. Entering the guild, he was confused by all the noise and urgency in the air. He went straight to one of the employees for some guild requests. The lady lazily looked up and saw the miasma scavenger, explaining that a new labyrinth had been discovered recently. A new labyrinth means a new place, filled with treasures and magic items scattered around. Times like these are rare, a golden opportunity for any adventurer, with enough skill and luck to make a name for themselves. Now, it makes sense why the guild was bustling so loudly in the early hours of the day. The lady also notified Rude that the miasma herb he usually brings in will be subjected to a price decrease starting today. It took a minute for Rude to process what he just heard. He then asked the lady why that would be when this was his only stable source of income. She casually explained that the miasma labyrinth was never that popular to begin with. For the time being, most people will be exploring the new labyrinth, so there will be no demand for grass. It made sense, but this was still some horrible news for Rude. The lady added that the new labyrinth is located in the Avelio Mountains, and added that Rude won't be allowed to go. It turned out that the new spot's exploration requirement was D rank or higher. The E-ranked Rude didn't make the cut. Gritting his teeth, nothing was working for Rude today. He pleaded to be allowed to dive into the new labyrinth, but rules are there for a reason. Even if he managed to go inside, he'd most likely end up dying in vain anyway. Rude's saving grace came in the form of a stranger, who offered him a spot in his party as a porter. The man had an innocent smile. He looked pretty chill.
Are you sure about that?
Desperate to earn some cash quickly, Rude ended up agreeing to the stranger's offer. Right now, they're heading for the Avelio Mountains. Inside the carriage was a party of 3, plus their new porter. Rude. The leader seemed cordial, treating him with respect and clearly assigning the role of carrying materials for the new labyrinth. Rude remained on guard with these strangers, though. He knew that porters were in high demand, since most parties were gathered in the new labyrinth. The rest of the party finally spoke up, a red-haired lady and a crude brute. They protested the addition of the infamous miasma scavenger to their labyrinth dive. The leader dispelled the hostility by saying that Rude is an experienced adventurer, him to do a much better job than a newbie. Mr. Captain introduced himself as Bear, the leader of Scarlet Sword. The disrespectful redhead was Sasha, and the aggressive big guy was Rick. All three of them were D-rank adventurers. Rude introduced himself in return, plainly expressing his gratitude. Before they reached their destination, Bear wants to know more about Rude by seeing his guild card. Opening his card, it was revealed that Rude was only at level 7 with some mediocre stats. Bear saw that the man had some fire magic talent as well, but the power was too low for combat use. He mostly used his weak fire as a light source, for cooking and other small stuff. The leader giggled and commented that it sounded plenty helpful. As they headed to the treacherous mountainsides, Bear told Rude that they'd be counting on him. Upon arrival, the Scarlet Sword 3 beamed with excitement at the sight of the newly discovered labyrinth. It took a long-ass carriage ride to reach the ruins, but they finally touched down, right outside the gate of the Avelio Labyrinth. By the looks of the exterior, it seemed like they were the only people around. It made them even more excited to do the dive. The gates, sculpted with esoteric designs, opened without much resistance. The inside of the labyrinth was quite different from the exterior. But what was more noticeable was the number of adventurers already settling inside the starting area. It was so crowded that it was hard to find a base camp for themselves. There were people arranging their wares, some fighting low-level beasts. There were even sights of adventurers smiling from ear to ear as they flaunted how much treasure they got from the depths. Sasha regretted being so excited to be the first ones inside, when it turned out that the place was already packed. Given the crowding, it seemed like most of the first layer had been explored already. Simple-minded Rick offered a simple-minded solution. They could just dive in deeper than everyone else. The further down, the fewer people would be. Rude spoke up to vote against this reckless plan, with newly discovered labyrinths. It's standard practice to map the first layer first. He couldn't even finish his point before Sasha and Rick got in his face to insult a mere porter's unwelcome opinion. If Bear hadn't stopped them, these two would never have stopped hounding Rude. The leader put his foot down and agreed to Rick's plan. If they played it safe, they wouldn't get any good results. With a bit of risk and a possibility of high returns, the Scarlet Sword would aim even deeper. For a minute, it looked like their choice to go deeper was the right one, as they reached the fourth layer without much trouble. Sure, there were times when monsters appeared out of nowhere, unaccustomed to enemies that could kill him in one shot. Rude was teetering on the edge the whole time. Fortunately, Rick and the rest of the group were pretty capable fighters. The brute even assured Rude not to be scared of small fries anymore. Sasha also demonstrated her fearsome spells, burning a wolf to a crisp using lightning. Bear worked swiftly and methodically. He was a well-trained swordsman through and through. Rude was just there to gather loot, so he was free to watch the combat from behind. Their strength was undeniable. He was so fearful of the monsters around that he was having a hard time moving his body, yet these guys were trashing everything along the way. When the final wolf fell, Bear finally sighed in relief as he withdrew his blade. The party could finally get some much-needed rest. They were very pleased with the decision to dive deeper. They had no other parties with which to share resources. Monsters in this layer weren't too strong, and they'd already found some decent treasures along the way. While everyone is in a good mood, Rick crudely orders Rude to collect the materials from the monsters he killed. With the three resting, it was time for Rude to earn his keep by looting the corpses. The problem was that it was impossible to collect materials from the monsters that Rick killed, as they were too damaged, and their magic stones were probably shattered. Rick took his words as complaints and insisted that the miasma scavenger shouldn't be slacking off now. Rude clicked his tongue. He was tired of being treated like this. But the scene of Rick slaughtering fearsome monsters without a problem had been imprinted on his mind. The guy was strong as hell. So, Rude could only ball his fists in anger while following unreasonable orders.
Me personally, I wouldn't take this level of disrespect.
He made his way to one of the wolves that Rick slaughtered, and it was not a pretty sight. The corpse was mangled, and the guts and blood smelled awful. There was no reason to go this far in combat. Using the little bit of fire element he could control, Rude thought of a solution. He thought the massive wounds should be burned and cauterized to eliminate the foul odor. Rick watched as he burned the corpses and laughed. He jokingly mentioned that Rude might be planning to eat the thing. Speaking of eating, they'd been exploring for a while, and hunger was starting to set in. Even monster meat was starting to look appetizing. Sasha stopped him from even joking about that. Eating monsters is a huge taboo for adventurers. You remember why, right? Rick smiled and just thought about using all the money from this deep dive to eat as much delicious food as he wanted. That mouth-watering imagination dissipated as soon as a heavy and ominous presence entered the room. Sasha, Bear, and Rude felt their eardrums close to shattering upon hearing the screeching sound coming from a nearby source. In front of them was a monster with red fur and heavy hooves. It was so heavy that each step shook the entire labyrinth layer. Sporting a battle axe, red eyes, and impressive horns, it was the mythical Minotaur. As far as Rude could remember, a Minotaur was classified as a B-rank monster. This type of enemy shouldn't appear in just the 4th layer of the new labyrinth. It's just too shallow. Even the arrogant members of the party were certain that beating that Minotaur would be impossible with their current strength. They were just D-rank after all. Bear hurriedly ordered Rude to hand over the backpack, as there was an item they could use in there. He rushed to Rude's side, telling him to keep an eye on the monster's movement while taking the bag. Rude turned to Bear for their game plan, worried about being wiped out. The traitorous leader of the Scarlet Sword smirked mischievously. Sure, he had a plan, a great one at that. It involved swinging his blade towards the porter. With his back turned toward Bear, Rude was sliced down, his blood painting the labyrinth. Afterward, Bear called Rick and Sasha to assemble quickly. With a knowing smile, Rick immediately cast a warrior's encouragement spell, launching his battle axe, where Rude was lying face down in the puddle of his own blood. Sasha followed it up with a haste spell, doubling the party's movement speed. Rude had a sudden realization that these three were colluding to abandon him as soon as an unbeatable beast showed up. Bear's gentle demeanor was gone. This was the emergency escape plan all along, leaving the miasma scavenger as bait to buy time. The three ran away from the cursed area with twisted smiles on their faces. Rude could only scream his frustration at the inhumane treatment he was being put through. He tried his best to stand back up, seeing the Minotaur slowly lift its massive weapon, locked in on him. Looking at the beast right in its murderous crimson eyes, fear took over. Fortunately, he had enough strength left to awkwardly dodge the incoming strike. He landed poorly, swept away by the attack's impact. Even though he was handed a death sentence, Rude still took pride in the dodge he just performed. But he was not delusional. He knew that this would probably be the end for him. The frustrated Minotaur used its body to slam against the poor porter, crushing Rude with its body weight. A pang of agony spread throughout his body as he threw up blood. This reckless attack, courtesy of the Minotaur, was so impactful that it started cracking the floor. The ground eventually caved in, making Rude and the beast fall to the lower floor. The frail floor of the 4th layer collapsed, opening a gaping hole with a lethal drop height. Rude passed out in the middle of that fall. When he opened his eyes, he was practically paralyzed from all the injuries he had sustained. He was confused about still breathing after a series of unfortunate events. Sure, he was weakened to a pathetic state, but he was still alive. He survived the fall because he landed on top of the dead Minotaur's body instead of splatting onto the floor. It was an incredible stroke of luck, but with his current condition, it would only be a matter of time until his body succumbed too. Even if no monster was attracted to the commotion of the fall, he'd die from blood loss or starvation at this rate. Speaking of starvation, Rude felt incredibly hungry. He had been working all day, slaving over the party's loot. At the bottom of the labyrinth, it was just him and the dead Minotaur. A thought popped into his head. What if he ate this dead Minotaur underneath him? But it's common knowledge that eating a monster would only lead to disaster. Closing his eyes, Rude reflected on the miserable life he lived. Slowly losing consciousness, he remembered the valiant man who gave him the creed he had been living by. No matter how hard or painful life gets, he must never give up. Right now, never giving up meant using the last bit of his remaining strength to bite into the monster's flesh, tearing the tough, raw meat with his teeth.
Oh! Ew! Dude! What the?
It was bloody and supremely disgusting, but he gnawed on that meat like his life depended on it. If a human with depleted magic were to eat mana-rich monster meat, the monster's mana particles would have an easier time invading the human's body. People have dubbed this phenomenon a monsterized state. It was said to be worse than dying from poison, a terrifying fate. Right now, Rube was going through that very same effect rapidly. Slowly losing his sanity, he continued to carve up the dead beast for even more bloody meat. His hands were practically charred by the intense mana rampaging through his body at this point. He broke the taboo, after all, but this was a gamble he had to take in hopes of regaining all the blood he lost and quelling his incessant hunger. Even with the possibility of entering the monsterized state being astronomical, he continued to tear the corpse of the beast apart, and it brought about an unexpected transformation. A few moments later, we find ourselves in the dark, spooky halls of the deeper layers of the newly discovered labyrinth. Everywhere you look, you would see glowing pairs of eyes observing and lurking, all waiting for prey. Those eyes belonged to the bat beasts of the mysterious lair. Coming down this grim hall was the disheveled Rude carrying Rick's axe. Looking at his beast like eyes and fangs, it was evident that he was starting to lose control. Seeing new prey heading down the dark, the bats immediately charged in for a feast. With the remaining control he had over his body, Rube activated the new war skill. An apparition in the shape of the Minotaur manifested itself with a guttural roar, intimidating opponents. The roar was so mighty that it nearly burst the incoming bats. They all fell to the floor one by one. It was a complete wipeout. But Rube was not done yet. With a little bit of respite, he used a physical boost to temporarily enhance his physical strength. Gripping the battle axe tightly, Rube's muscles were tearing off his sleeves. He charged in with reckless abandon and started swinging at whatever the labyrinth was throwing at him. Rube was desperately clinging to his life, going as far as biting into the raw bats. The dude must have never heard of COVID. What he obtained after doing a bat mukbang was the echolocation ability. Using this sound type technique, he was able to detect surrounding creatures, especially in darkness. While he was fighting for his life, a few other monster inhabitants of the labyrinth had locked their sights on a human who dared to walk around their territory. Meanwhile, Rube was just playing with his new echolocation perk. With his presence known by the entire layer of beasts, they started coming in swarms. Instead of descending into insanity, Rube looked like he just got beat up as he bravely posed a question of who's going to eat whom by the end of this clash. Dismembered monster limbs flew all over the bloody place. Rube was a madman, a butcher hungry for more. As soon as he was done beheading the first beast, he was already crushing the head of the next one. The battle axe fit perfectly in his callous hands, and he could sense monster magic without using his eyes. It was an extended stretch of nothing but slaughter and gore, and he liked it. He was good at it, and he was doing so with a satisfied smile plastered on his face. After raging and killing, he would take the various monster parts and eat them, gulping them down without flinching. Every time he devoured the array of beasts that the labyrinth kept throwing at him, he could feel his body temperature rising as a devastating power continuously surged through his body. At this point, he did not care what the enemy looked like. Every beast was just a bag of meat lining up for slaughter. For the first time in his life, Rube was experiencing the joy of being a powerhouse. It took him quite a while, but he eventually found a door that led to somewhere other than another chamber of the labyrinth. He could actually see the light. As soon as he stepped outside, the warmth of the sun touched his skin. All the tension and murderous intent he had melted under the sunlight. Walking away from the damned labyrinth, he abandoned the battle axe that ripped through to him, the axe he used to kill and butcher so many monsters for consumption. There was no doubt about it. He was finally back outside. Standing alone on top of the ancient ruins, he screamed his survival at the top of his lungs. The first place he visited after escaping the ridiculous ordeal was naturally the Adventurers Guild. The mood inside the guild was one of confusion and apprehension as the adventurers looked at each other with wariness. The Scarlet Sword Party was summoned by the guild officials to explain what happened in their expedition. The guild representative took their statements as well as the accounts of all the adventurers who were in the labyrinth. Bologna Branch Guild Master Lankars had taken note of everyone, who had just returned from the newly discovered labyrinth, and the only one missing was Rude. Bear acted his ass off, while he recounted how they encountered a terrifying Minotaur in the fourth lair. He claimed that the poor guy was killed before they could protect him. Even Rick and Sasha were doing a bang-up job of selling the story. They seemed genuinely devastated by the loss of a comrade. Lankars remained vigilant but fair, asserting that he understood what happened now. For now, the guild would prohibit entry into the new labyrinth until they finish investigating. Suddenly, the lazy front desk lady of the guild saw someone walk into the premises, which made her eyes bulge. She could recognize that janky gear any day. It was the miasma scavenger, Rude. With him walking in with cuts, bruises, and wounds, the story of the Scarlet Sword Party had just lost all credibility. The three turned to the door and could not believe their eyes. They did the perfect setup to use the porter as bait, yet here he was. Realizing what this might mean, Lankar started thinking about the statement. Desperate to get ahead of this mess, the traitorous bear continued his act, running to Rude like a concerned comrade. He hugged Rude like a brother, then whispered a threat of murder if Rude ever decided to yap about what truly happened. Rick and Sasha also played the roles of caring friends, insisting that they tried to go back and look for Rude, but the labyrinth was closed. Rick gave him what looked like an innocent shoulder tap, but the force and grip suggested otherwise. Bear flashed his classic white knight smile as he announced the celebration of Rude's survival. But they couldn't celebrate properly in a place like the Adventurers Guild. Right now, two of the traitors were resting their hands on Rude's shoulders, threatening him with their grip strength. The Jigga Chad just stood there menacingly, never backing down against this BS. As loud as he could, he proclaimed that the Scarlet Sword Party used him as a pawn for their own safety. This was not a good look for Bear and the gang at all. Public perception could quickly shift against the party. So he made a half-assed attempt at feigning ignorance, hoping that it would be enough. But Guildmaster Lankars wanted to cut through the lies and demanded that Rude elaborate on his claim. Rude walked up to the old man, looked him in the eye, and recounted the real story of how Bear stole his supplies and attacked him from behind. As for Rick, he was the one who used the skill to lure the Minotaur's aggro to the helpless Rude. Sasha cannot be absolved after casting the haste spell, so they can run away, while the bag porter is being torn apart. Bear immediately pleaded for the guild master not to believe Rude. Luckily, this world had some techniques to clarify whose story was the real one. The girl who harnessed such a technique was dressed in a long purple robe while carrying a golden bejeweled staff. It was at that moment the Scarlet Sword Party knew they had messed up. They were not expecting a truth officer, who rarely leaves the royal capital, to pull up. Guildmaster Lankars went out of his way and called in a few favors to invite the officer, due to the unusually high number of deaths among temporary porters that the three employed. So, it was now up to the truth officer's judgment whether the party or Rude was telling the truth. The three stooges were shaken, and Rude was cool as a cucumber. The nonchalant officer looked at the involved people and peered through their souls to determine the truth. It only took a moment for her to announce that the members of Scarlet Sword were a bunch of lying bastards. She raised her staff, emitting a cleansing light all over the room, and proclaimed that Rude's claim was the truth. Bear's face contorted to an indescribable mess. He knew that his career in life would be done because of this verdict. All the adventurers looked at the party with disgust and anger for being a bunch of murdering sickos. To say that what they did was frowned upon was an understatement. Desperate, Bear claimed that the girl could not possibly know that, even though that's literally her job description. Guildmaster Lankars had enough of this BS. The truth skill that truth officers possess is impossible to acquire in the later stages of life. It had to be painstakingly nurtured through time, and its effectiveness rivals a unique skill. It's a highly trusted system that the royal capital established, so no lie can pass. The truth skill is the ultimate tool for justice. There could be no one more trustworthy than the words of an expert who had pledged their life and power to the country. The Guildmaster's fury could be felt throughout the room. His piercing glare was so intense that scumbag Bear unconsciously retreated. Lankars voiced the adventurer's taboo of deliberately abandoning a comrade in combat. But the sins of the Scarlet Sword were much worse than that. They intentionally injured porters, using them as bait and viewing them as disposable pawns. Even prior to an extensive investigation of their crimes, the guild had enough dirt to revoke their adventurer qualifications on the spot and throw them into slavery. Sasha and Rick lamented their inevitable fate when they willingly dug their own graves in the first place. Bear, on the other hand, felt furious and unwilling to live the life of a lowly slave. His anger reached a boiling point, directing it toward the pesky truth officer for exposing his crimes. He thought that if only she hadn't shown up, he would have gotten away scot-free. In the heat of the moment, the fool dared to raise his blade against an officer employed by the royal capital. Everyone was shocked that the dumbass would dare to do so in front of every adventurer around. There was only one person, quick-witted and fast enough to make a move. Rude calmly unsheathed his blade and met Bear's attack with perfect precision. He grimly warned Bear to never dare touch the truth officer. But the leader of the party was too far gone. His mental state had been broken, and rage had taken over. Seeing as the fool was too far gone, Rude socked that bastard squarely in the face, his front teeth flying to different continent.
You're a victim.
He sent Bear flying with an explosive punch. everyone in the room could feel the strength behind the attack. It was so surprisingly powerful that the impact was felt outside the guild. Rick and Sasha's blood went cold. Maybe they were thinking of backing up Bear, but now they're glad they didn't. Rude's fist was practically smoldering from his newfound strength. A few moments later, once things had settled down, the guild master invited Rude to talk in the reception room. Lankars apologized for pulling him aside after what he had gone through. Rude was fine, though he was more concerned about the fate of those criminals. Thankfully, the guild staff took the trio in to undergo further interrogation. They are repeat offenders, treating porters as bait. They will lose all possessions and qualifications produced to a life of slavery. But Bear crossed the line when he tried to attack the truth officer. They'll probably suffer a fate worse than death in some labor camp. Since they've lost their rights to profits gained in the new labyrinth, Rude was now entitled to the entirety of the loot. It comes up to about 200,000 Regin, making Rude a wealthy man. After his conversation with the guild master, Rude walked out of the room with a sack of riches in his hands. He could finally cover most of his living expenses with this much cash, so that's a lot of weight off his mind. Earning 200,000 Regin through gathering miasma grass would have been impossible, so this was quite a haul for him. Walking away with a bag full of Regin, he noticed that no one was messing with him. It must be because of what he did to Bear earlier, but it would be wise to remain vigilant. If he stands out even more, arousing unwanted attention might lead to some suspicion regarding his sudden power-up. He might have to continue living like a miasma scavenger for now. Still, he was happy to be adequately compensated for the hell he went through. With some money in his pockets, he could get some good gear and eat whatever he wanted. So, his first stop after the massive payday was the tool shop. The product at the forefront of the store was a magic bag, a very rare item. Next up would be getting something to eat, to cleanse the taste of raw monster meat from his palate. The very next day, Rude was back on his grind, entering the miasma labyrinth just like he used to. This time, the miasma rats were basically trash mobs, easy to kill. A few days ago, fighting against these critters would have been a life or death scenario. Now, they didn't even pose a threat. After wiping out a group of rats, he used the appraisal skill he got from a one-eyed beast. He was surprised to see a detailed account of the rat corpse. You could see its level, race, status, attributes, and skills. It was nice to know that the appraisal skill of that disgusting monster could be used even on corpses. Speaking of levels, he'd been so occupied with shopping that he forgot to check just how much his status had increased. Since the level 9 rats were easily cleaved, he reckoned that he must have jumped to around level 20. But as soon as he opened his status window, he saw that he had reached level 42. Every attribute in his panel had reached 3 digits. He knew he'd gotten stronger, but not this much. Level 42 was just ridiculous. Before the incident, he was a measly level 7 noob. Now he couldn't be trifled with. The next thing he curiously checked was his skill window. There, the abnormal status nullification wasn't alone anymore. He had a plethora of combat and utility skills to choose from. Who wouldn't be happy upon seeing a stack of skills to play with? Rude recalled that, passing by the spot where he fell in the 4th layer of the labyrinth, the wall that should have been broken was sealed back up. Since the new labyrinth will remain closed for a while, he can't investigate the oddity any further. So today, exploring the miasma labyrinth is at the top of the list. In here, he could finally test his new powers out. He could finally dive into the deeper floors. Just the thought of it made him shiver with anticipation. He also bought that expensive magic bag from yesterday, so looting would not be a problem anymore. Looking at the stairs leading to the deeper floors, Rude wanted to find the right monster to test some skills on. The 6th floor wasn't much different from the lower ones. He faced off against rats mostly. The 9th floor was a bit tougher with all the poison frogs. They weren't much of a challenge either. The 13th floor was plagued with disgusting bugs, but they were easy to deal with. He'd been delving deeper and deeper, but the difficulty wasn't increasing too much. He really wanted to find more suitable prey for his skills. This itch led him all the way down to the 24th floor of the miasma labyrinth. It was a damp marshland filled with thicker toxic miasma. The primary monsters occupying the area were lizardmen equipped with blades and armor. Sneaking around, Rude found one of the scaly bastards roaming around. He quickly used appraisal and determined that the lizard soldier was level 25 and had some decent skills to boot. As far as he was aware, lizard soldiers were supposed to fight in coordination with companions, but he just happened to spot one going solo. Smiling at himself, Rude reckoned that he could finally get a little serious. Testing his skills might be worth a try. Without wasting another second, he snuck up to the beast from behind. his sword drawn and primed for an attack. Just as he expected, the sneak attack was effective, but the lizard soldier managed to react at the last second. Smiling with glee, Rude finally found a decent opponent. The first attack might have been a little short, but the next one wouldn't be. Much to his surprise, the beast did not retaliate, but hurriedly retreated instead. He had never encountered a monster wise enough to retreat against a stronger opponent. Halfway through the chase, Rude saw that the lizard was running to a dead end. Slowing down his steps as he drew his sword back out, the beast shouldn't be able to escape now. Instead of fear and desperation, the lizard soldier turned around with a crafty smile on its face. Rude finally realized that he had not trapped the beast. Turning around, he saw more lizard soldiers approaching from behind. He had not trapped the lone lizard soldier. He was the one who had foolishly walked into one.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
By the time he realized this was his setup, it was a tad too late. Even with the difference in level, the situation didn't look good. He was surrounded on all sides and the area was too narrow. One of the lizard soldiers opened with a ruthless slash that Rude masterfully dodged. Pushed into a disadvantaged situation, Rude calmed down and decided to take these bastards down one by one. He went on the offensive, surprising the lizard soldier with his raw strength. The attack itself was blocked, but the momentum toppled the beast. Rude ruthlessly followed it up with a wide swing at the undefended lizard soldier. It would have been a slam dunk, had it not been for the other one defending with a shield. He wasn't quite used to fighting against organized groups yet, so the coordination was messing with his flow. Suddenly, he sensed the last lizard soldier coming from behind. He was nearly hacked by a mighty swing, but he ducked down with urgency. The lizard looked at him with frustration, and Rude brazenly smiled at the dangerously close encounter. The fight must have attracted the attention of even more lizard soldiers nearby. He was practically fighting a small army now. It looked like a hopeless situation, but Rude was not a quitter. Sure, it might look like these monsters had impeccable coordination with each other. They could utilize ambush tactics, and their movements were clean and precise. But before they became an organized force, Rude heard a high-pitched sound from a distance. He carefully dodged every incoming attack while focusing on scanning the crowd of lizard soldiers. Finally, he spotted a lizard man with red scales, standing resolutely at the rear. Rude quickly activated appraisal to check on that odd lizard. It was a level 32 general lizard, with higher stats than your run-of-the-mill soldier. Among its standard skills was the command ability. Rude smiled with delight as he finally found a way to get out of this trap. The general must have realized that too, as it felt fearful for its safety. In response, it roared out with another high-pitched scream, commanding the army to increase the pressure. The morale of the lizard soldiers seemingly shot up as they excitedly charged the human. 3 soldiers wielding different weapons came at Rude from various angles. A perfectly coordinated 3-pronged attack. This was the perfect time to test out some of his skills, starting with physical boost. Grunting as his arms burned up with increased strength, Rude did not bother defending and unleashed a stronger and faster attack to break up the 3-pronged strike. The lizard soldier at the vanguard did not know what to do, seeing how unstoppable the human looked. That lizard was lucky that Rude's eyes were focused on a different target. He just used the poor lizard's head as a literal stepping stone. One jump was all it took to bypass the horde of lizard soldiers waiting for their turn, as Rude raised his blade against the general behind enemy lines. The miasma scavenger and the lizard general stared into each other's eyes as Rude brought down his sword in one swift motion. His sword sliced the general's flesh like a hot knife through butter. He thought the win was his for the taking, but that did not seem to be the case. Rude landed that slash, but there are no two ways about it. But the general remained mysteriously unscathed. Its mouth slowly crept into a mischievous smile. The lizard general used the sword in its hand to launch a quick stab forward. Still reeling from the shock of not dealing any damage, Rude struggled to pick his blade back up to defend. At such a close range, dodging seemed impossible. Unfortunately for the lizard general, Rude had an ace up his sleeve too. Multiple aces at that. One of them was the steel body skill from a spider beast. When it comes to trump cards, he's not one to be trifled with. Shocked by Rude's seemingly invulnerable armor, the general subconsciously stepped a few paces back as fast as it could. He got the momentum back, but he was still curious as to why his supposed sure kill slash did not deal any damage. So, he used appraisal again. Rude definitely felt the impact and the flesh getting torn, but the general did not have so much as a scratch, and it did not possess any sort of skill that enhanced their durability like he did. So it's safe to say, that it's probably due to someone else's power. Analyzing the nearby lizard soldiers, they did not have anything unusual in their skill list. That was until he peered behind even further, where an injured lizard soldier with his body torn open, where the general was supposed to be wounded, was standing. In its skill list was an ability called Substitute. That substitute skill must be why the general remained unscathed. That soldier was taking the damage for the boss instead. Seeing the human coming, Substitute Lizard did not know what to do. Ryu's problem was solved with a single stab of his blade right into the lizard's stomach. He couldn't help but think how tough it must be for a soldier to be reduced to a lowly substitute for the general. Killing the poor lizard was a merciful thing. Wiping the lizard blood off his blade, he told the dying lizard not to take it personally. Seeing the substitute die, the general started freaking out. Without a guaranteed shield against lethal force, death was just one slash away now. So, the Red Scale boss ordered every lizard soldier in the vicinity to launch an attack all at once. Rude answered by activating thread manipulation. He used the resilient spider web to launch himself upwards, swinging like he was Spider-Man or something. Just like that, he was out of the lizard army's reach, and the general did not like that at all. From above, Rude masterfully weaved the threads. With the soldiers gathering in one place, it had become easier for him to do what he was about to do. Looking like a proper spider, he unleashed the thread on the idle beasts below. The general yelled another command, but it was a tad too late. Every soldier was trapped in the web of threads, tangled up and unable to move. The same went for the lizard general. They foolishly tried to bum rush the human, but got crowd-controlled instead. The lizard general was reconsidering all the stupid moves it made when a shadow loomed over its face. Ryu raised his sword to finally claim his hard-fought victory. He decapitated the red-scaled beast in one swift slice. This time, there was no substitute to bail the general out. The mighty boss died kneeling on the ground, his blood painting the floor. It was a fitting end to an intense battle. Lizard general's chopped-off head grotesquely lay on the cold, hard ground. After losing their leader, the webbed-up soldiers didn't stand a chance against Ryu's massacre. Not even one was spared. With so many dead lizard soldiers littering the floor, the only thing going through his mind was the feast he was about to enjoy. He bought the magic bag with the guild compensation, and it was finally time to use it. Inside this precious artifact was a separate space expanded by magic. The way of its contents would be completely reduced when closed. Inside, he had prepared a few things in advance, namely, cooking utensils and a few of his preferred seasonings. He carefully butchered the lizard meat with a cooking knife, as if he were in his own kitchen. Back on the hidden floor, he was just a desperate mess trying to survive. Rude had had enough of eating nasty raw meat, and now he wanted to try properly cooking some. After removing the scales from some lizard tail, the preparation was complete. He set up a makeshift stone stove and slowly cooked the lizard meat, adding various seasonings to enhance the flavor. After it was done cooking, he stared at the monster meat in front of him, as his mouth watered at how good it looked. He was sure that this was the move, cooking monster meat was the way. He took the perfectly seared steak and bit into it hungrily. Just as he expected, the flavors were top tier, miles ahead of eating raw flesh and blood. Based on his experience yesterday, he hadn't expected that monster meat, when prepared properly, would taste so immaculate. He really might get addicted to it. After finishing the plateful of General Lizard's steak, he acquired one-handed swordsmanship, shield technique, miasma resistance, and, most importantly, command. The food was utterly delicious, and the skills obtained just made it all the more scrumptious. He thought that the taste might be related to the magic powers inside the meat. Reflecting on the battle, he had already utilized the skills obtained from the Minotaur. Armor Spider and the Evil Eye, all of them had been supremely useful. There were still some monster skills that he hadn't tried yet, though. He was itching to use the skills acquired from the Thunder Wolf and the Black Serpent. The Lizard General meal he had was so good that he gobbled everything up quickly. Standing up with a newfound appreciation for monster meat, he planned to try eating a greater variety of monsters on his way back out. On the matter of skills, there was also that lizard soldier with the substitute skill. It was a weird skill, but it might prove useful later on, so he ate that beast too. Afterward, he started descending the miasma labyrinth, finding himself back on the 21st floor. There, he faced off against bugs that emitted some sort of abnormal status scales. He also met the colorful, poisonous frogs once more. Ryu faced off against these poor saps with a cold and calculated approach, while calling the power of thunder inside his body. Using the lightning cloak obtained from the Thunder Wolf, he fried every hostile monster in the vicinity in one go. The bugs and the frogs didn't stand a chance at all, as they all fell flat on the floor. Smiling at himself, Rube was pleased with Lightning Cloak's destructive power. What made this floor easier was the abundance of monsters specializing in status ailments. Unfortunately for them, it picked the wrong opponent today. Taking out his cooking utensils for the second time, Rude excitedly looked forward to making some frog meat and insect dishes. He combined the two to make some golden brown fried goodness. You would not suspect that it was poisonous monster meat at first glance. Perhaps there's nobody else in the world who could snack on this fried, soft, poisoned frog meat without dying on the spot. Eating the combination dish gave him a few more skills, namely venom, temperature variation, poison scale powder, paralysis scale powder, and aerial slash. While he was busy enjoying his extravagantly deadly meal, he heard some muffled sounds coming from a distance. It sounded like a crash, followed by human voices. Rude smiled, thinking that there were other adventurers strong enough to make it this deep in the miasma labyrinth. He quickly packed up his cooking utensils, while still gnawing on some monster meat. Rude ran through the tunnels of the 21st floor, excited to see other parties in combat, as it's rare to see one such a high level. If he was lucky, he might even be able to exchange some information with them. But he might have been a little too optimistic in his approach. A group of 4 veteran-looking adventurers was ganging up on another adventurer. From the looks of it, the cloaked figure on the ground had been injured by the 4. The swordsman's blade had been stained by the blood of a fellow adventurer. That couldn't be a good sign, right? Meanwhile, one of the punks lamented getting hurt by the cloaked woman. He hadn't expected that she'd have so much magic left when they attacked. The swordsman smiled, thinking that all the trouble they went through would be worth it. He reached his hand out and removed the cloak obscuring the woman's face. She had pointy ears, platinum hair, deep green eyes, and an angelic face. There was no doubt about it, this girl was an elf.
You gonna make me act up.
The party of 4 was already looking forward to selling her off, wondering how much money they could get for such a rare specimen. At that moment, Rude made himself known. He was kind of hoping to make some adventurer friends, but this looked like a bad crowd to hang out with. The 4 turned around, looking annoyed at the unexpected interruption. Rude slowly approached them with a serious expression. Sure, he didn't know the full context of what was happening here. But he couldn't just stand by and watch 4 men gang up to attack a single woman. That's just not how he rolls. The one-eyed swordsman locked in, asking Rude to introduce himself. Lifting his head up high with a confident smile, he simply introduced himself as a random adventurer. The elf woman hurriedly yelled at him to get out and not get involved, as these 4 were adventurer hunters. Quietly activating his appraisal skill, Rude recalled hearing about adventurer hunters. They were supposed to be high-ranking adventurers with an unsavory lifestyle. The man leading the party was a level 65 one-eyed swordsman named Falzes. The others were level 52, 56, and 58 respectively. Aside from their names and levels, Rude couldn't peer through anything else. He reckoned that they may be using a concealment skill or some kind of counter-magic tool. Falzes coldly ordered his men to take down the fool who dared to interrupt their hunt. The first to move was the punk with the ridiculously long tongue, drawing his sword against our boy. Rude was taken aback by how fast the bastard moved. Fortunately, his reaction time was quick enough to block with his own sword. Tomboy praised him for not doing too badly. Rude clapped back, saying that he was doing well because the attack was weak. Offended by the offhand comment, Tomboy and his fragile ego pushed harder. The other hunters watched from the sidelines as their ally went crazy, making all sorts of unhinged threats. After successfully baiting him into a rage, Rude slowly unleashed another one of his unused skills. He spat thick globs of venom right into Tomboy's face. Not only was it noxious, but the venom also had a corrosive property. It burned Tomboy's face, like magma making contact with his skin. The other hunters were alarmed. Their comrade had just been poisoned by a stranger spitting venom. They couldn't shake the feeling that they were looking at a monster. Rude had to resort to a reckless way of fighting, utterly different from a typical adventurer. It might not look graceful, but it was effective. With the gap in strength, he had to do this to survive. Falzes remained calm, trying to discern if that poison was a unique skill. Rude's threat level had just increased, and the hunters knew better than to underestimate him now. So the one-eyed swordsman tasked the remaining 2 to work alongside him for a 3-pronged attack. The caliber of their combination was leagues above the lizard soldiers from earlier. Their moves were forceful and precise. If Rude stopped for even a second, his head might fly off. As soon as the first attack was dodged, another one would come at a tricky angle. Rude had to back off a bit to regain his breath. It was at that moment that Falls came in with a kick locked and loaded. Not having enough time to evade the incoming attack, Rude hurriedly activated Steel Body. He tanked the hit with his head, but Steel Body neutralized most of the damage. The impact still sent him flying far, landing in a bog of green substance that looked highly toxic. Falls inwardly admitted that this stranger was incredibly tough. Any other fighter tanking his full-powered kick would have had their neck broken. Seeing Rude groggily stand up in the bog, the hunters gained more confidence that they had this fight in the bag. The big hunter stepped into the noxious puddle with his heavy armor on, but Rude just ran deeper into the bog. Frustrated, the big guy followed. Or at least he would have given chase had the leader not stopped him from doing something so stupid. The bog wasn't just a bog, it was a poisonous swamp. Walking back out alive, if they went any deeper, was not guaranteed. Falls reckoned that the same idea applied to the stranger. He thought the poison would be impossible to withstand, and Rude would have no other choice but to come out soon. Upon reaching a relatively deep part of the swamp, Rude turned around to watch the hunters wait for him like a pack of hyenas. It looked like the hunters were willing to wait for him to come out. He was lucky he had been knocked into a poisoned swamp. On top of the ever-present miasma, the poisonous vapors around the area would rapidly drain anyone's stamina. Not his, though. After a few minutes of waiting, the hunters were starting to feel the stamina drain kicking in, making their breaths ragged and labored without even moving. They were starting to grow impatient. They wanted to see Ryu get out of the swamp so badly. It had been 10 minutes since they posted up, and the headaches and sickness were setting in. Ryu just patiently counted the minutes while eyeing the hunters. He wanted to buy more time and weaken them further, but they might just up and leave if he waited longer. Moreover, if he took any longer to deal with the hunters, the elf girl would suffer an even bigger burden with her bleeding injury. So, Ryu decided to walk back to shore while asking the hunters how they were doing. Being affected by both poison and miasma could not be a good time at all. Seeing him slowly walk out of the swamp, they thought the stranger had finally given up after all the trouble he caused them. It was then that Ryu made the taunting confession that he's immune to status abnormalities, so he didn't really feel the pain they were currently feeling. Falls was furious. They had been waiting for nothing. With an abnormal status nullification skill, they were just inhaling toxins foolishly. They were tricked, backstabbed, and quite possibly bamboozled. Infuriated, the one-eyed swordsman angrily ordered his men to separate Ryu's head from his body. As the hunters charged forward, Ryu just stood in the shallows without moving an inch. The assassin was the first to dare meet him in the poisoned water as Ryu casually parried the blade with a confident smile. Mr. Assassin realized that he had messed up big time shortly after that. With the poison swamp gradually draining their stamina and the accumulated miasma inside their bodies lowering their stats, they practically made themselves much weaker willingly. While he was overpowering the assassin, the big guy foolishly joined the party like an angry brute. With such a telegraphed move, Ryu didn't even bother dodging or moving away. He just used a concentrated steel body on his backside in anticipation of the incoming blade. The big guy was caught off guard. He was expecting to cleave Ryu in half, but didn't even manage to make a dent in his lousy armor. With two of the hunters at his front and back, Ryu's energy soared as the air became supercharged with sparks of electricity. Using his blade as a medium, he stabbed it into the water and activated Lightning Cloak, summoning the apparition of the Thunder Wolf. The toxic water turned into the perfect shock delivery system. Mr. Assassin might be fast, but he couldn't be faster than lightning. The electrifying attack shocked him to the core, literally. The big guy might be tough and strong, but all of that is useless when your muscles are spasming from an ungodly wattage frying your circuits. By the time Ryu stopped with Lightning Cloak, Mr. Assassin had been burned, his mask torn, and his brain fried. The same went for the big guy, but he was resilient enough to stay upright and mumble his anger. With the remaining power in his body, blinded and fueled by rage, the big guy cursed at Ryu and charged once more. With the enemy heavily injured and slowed, Ryu found it appropriate to test out more of his new skills as bright green lights coalesced in his hand. Summoning the phantom of the flying bug he had just killed and fried earlier, Ryu unleashed the brutality of aerial slash for the first time. The wind blades were so fast and fierce that they went through the big guy's heavy armor, making him bleed from 1,000 massive cuts. Falls watched helplessly as his entire team was disposed of so quickly and bloodily. The stranger used venom as a surprise, steel body for defense, lightning cloak for range, and even aerial slash to top it off. Being a seasoned adventurer veteran, he had never seen a human possess the fearsome skills of monsters. Fear of the enigma that was rude crept up on his mind. Capitalizing on the one-eyed swordsman's shaken mental state, Rude pushed forward with his sword in hand, insisting that he had no obligation to tell him the method to his excellence. You have to give Falzes some credit for still duking it out, even while his worldview was crumbling. He should have been completely superior in a one-on-one sword fight, but he was accumulating cuts all over his body at an alarming rate. With every drop of blood escaping through his wounds, Falzes could feel the end coming faster. Because of the miasma and the poisonous vapors, he was really being pushed to an inevitably losing position bit by bit. Refusing to give in to the inevitable, Falz's only good eye lit up with a crimson hue as he desperately activated agility enhancement. His pride as an adventurer hunter made him refuse the possibility of being done in by a nameless nobody in the middle of a disgusting miasma labyrinth. Seeing the hurried movements and the reckless attacks, Rue locked in for the final stretch of the fight. Calling on the trusty phantasm of the B-rank Minotaur, he met the one-eyed swordsman's agility enhancement with his very own physical boost. Their final clash resulted in one of the blades shattering into pieces, a fate worse than death for a proud swordsman like Falzes. One final wound among the hundreds on his body finally capped off the fight. The infamous adventurer hunter fell face down onto the poisoned floor, his blood painting the mossy ground red. Rude's blade was stained by the blood of a powerful swordsman, a man who should have been much more powerful than him. He was fully aware that if it were not for the piling up of abnormal statuses in the one-eyed swordsman's body, he would have been the one lying in a pool of his own blood. Wait, are we about to witness cannibalism? Unfortunately, Rue's not that type of guy. After dealing with the hunters, he immediately rushed to the side of the elf woman and patched up her wound. Walking side by side, she sincerely thanked him for saving her. She doesn't even want to imagine what would have happened had he not shown up. Rue's just not the type of person who would leave a woman in that situation. He could see that she was trying to put up a brave front, but it is evident that her body was still suffering from the effects of the miasma. Rue did what he could for first aid, but he could only do so much. All things aside, seeing an elf in such a remote area is incredibly rare. Rue was kind of curious on what circumstances led her to be chased by ruthless adventurer hunters. In the middle of their walk back to the exit, a hostile presence made itself known. It was yet another one of those flying bugs filling the air with abnormal status scales, and it was a big one at that. Using appraisal, Rue determined that this big gal must be the leader of those moths from earlier. It was listed as the Great Moth, a level 37 insect beast with relatively high stats. Rue already had most of its skills except Moth Eyes. Jumping right into action, he held his sword and faced the Great Moth head-on, refusing to be intimidated by its size. Responding in kind, the bug unleashed its own version of aerial slash. Rue wasn't surprised by the attack. He had used the same one to deal a final blow against the big guy earlier, after all. Even though he knew what to expect, the impact of an aerial slash coming from a boss monster was no joke. It had the sharpness and intensity that could bust the ground open. The injured elf girl nearly became collateral damage. Fortunately, it looked like she had some combat experience, staying calm and moving out of the way. Rue was worried that she might be implicated by the wide-reaching attacks, though. After making sure that she was alright, Rue turned to the Great Moth. Since the bug scared him for a minute, he wanted to scare it back. The beast might have thought that flying made it safe, away from his reach, but the bug was mistaken. Rue opened his palm, and the familiar green light accumulated in his hand. An eye for an eye, an aerial slash for an aerial slash. That's how he rolls. His blades might be a little smaller, but they packed the same punch and destructiveness. With multiple blades came multiple wounds. With his body and pride wounded, the Great Moth decided to unload an ungodly number of paralyzing scales into the air in hopes of immobilizing Rude. This strategy would have worked against any other adventurer, but as we know, this man was built different. Paralysis does not work on him at all. His cocky smile faded away as soon as he realized that he was forgetting the elf girl. He might be immune to the scales, but she was not. Inhaling those things would be disastrous for the already injured elf. Thankfully, she was not as much of a liability as she looked. Using her staff, she prepared a spell to fight back against the paralyzing scales. A concentrated green beam fired away from the staff, erasing the scales altogether and continuing toward the Great Moth. By the time she was done, the beast had fallen, and Rue did not have to act as the hard carry. If he was not mistaken, she had just performed a high-level wind magic spell, as expected of an elven mage. just to make sure that the great moth was done for. Rude stabbed the insect in the head. The elf girl commented on his uncanny immunity to poison and paralysis. She had never met someone with that type of ability. He had skills that can typically be seen used by monsters. Rude hadn't come up with a cover story about his abilities yet, so it was kind of hard to explain. The threat had been neutralized, but the elf girl's injuries were flaring up. Rude was naturally worried, thinking that she might have been accidentally hit by some of the paralyzing scales. But she assured him that this was a different type of flare-up. Right now, they must prioritize getting out. She promised to tell him her story once they got out of the labyrinth. Fortunately, there weren't any more significant hiccups to their exit plan. There was a long walk from the 21st floor to the woods outside the labyrinth, but they made it somehow. Away from the thick miasma of the labyrinth, the fresh air made the elf girl feel a whole lot better. Before she started explaining her plight, the elf girl introduced herself as Alicia, a former adventurer. Hearing her name made Rude wide-eyed in surprise. He excitedly asked if she was Alicia of the Emerald Storm. With an amused laugh, she admitted that she was. She once belonged to the renowned S-rank party of Ludia's kingdom, the legendary Azure Trails. Every adventurer knew its members. But the story of Azure Trails wasn't fairy tale worthy. 5 years ago, something tragic happened, and they suffered a crippling defeat. On that day, Alicia recalled their expedition to the deepest part of the S-rank Abyssal Labyrinth. In that battle, their party leader died a brutal death, his body hacked in half. One had to retire due to severe injuries crippling his body, and another one was swallowed by the labyrinth itself. Even Alicia wasn't spared. She came out of that place broken. Slowly removing her top, she showed Rude a mark on her breast. Being the innocent man that he was, Rude was flustered by her actions. Upon closer inspection, he finally saw the curse mark placed on Alicia. It's known as the Curse of Level Down. Most people had never heard of this cruel curse. Alicia had tried every possible method to break it, but the best she could do was slow its progression. Those adventurer hunters knew about the curse and were planning to profit. Just as the name suggests, her level continues to plummet and death would be inevitable upon reaching level 0. Still, being hunted down to be sold would have been unbearable. Suddenly, an idea struck Rude. He casually blurted out that he might be able to help with her incurable curse. Riffling through his skill list, he found the Lizard Soldier's Substitute. In its description, it stated that the effect affected status ailments too. Rude instructed the confused Alicia to take on the skill he was about to activate. Under the serene woods, she trusted her savior with whatever he was trying to do. With the touch of a hand, Rude activated the Substitute skill. As soon as it took effect, the curse mark on Alicia's chest disintegrated and transferred over at him. It was an unbelievable sight. This man she had just met a few hours ago was absorbing her curse. She hurriedly told him to stop unless he wanted to die from the nasty ailment. Rude just smiled and assured her that it was going to be okay. After absorbing enough of the curse essence, an apparition beyond human comprehension lingered around Rude's body. Alicia could see it clearly, the presence that had been terrorizing her for 5 years now. It was reaching for her savior, planning to claim another unfortunate victim. But as soon as the curse apparition touched him, the abnormal status nullification cleansed the curse with a divine light. After deleting the evil incarnate in just a few seconds, Rude looked perfectly fine. He didn't even have to exert much effort, and it worked. Alicia was confused as to what had just happened, and Rude asked her to check her guild card. In there, the level 43 rank S Elven adventurer Alicia was now free of any status effects. She could not believe her eyes. She had been through hell and back trying to dispel the curse, and it was remedied by a random man who saved her in a random labyrinth. Rude casually explained that he had just tried taking on the curse and dispelling it for good, and he was glad that it had worked properly. Alicia's first response was to ask him if he was an idiot. Why would anyone take on such an immense risk for someone they just met? She said that, but the gratitude she felt for this strange man was immense. Just seeing Alicia smile was enough of a trade-off for taking on the risk. The two just stood under the trees for a while as Alicia's tears of relief fell down.